We all know the story of Jonah and the big fish. You've heard this story ever since you were little children. My question is, why? Why would anybody tell their kids a story about a real man getting swallowed by a big fish? That's more terrifying than hearing a story about flying monkeys. Children don't need to be terrorized. They need to hear stories about puppies who dress up as policemen and firemen and helicopter pilots who do good deeds and serve their community. Otherwise, what could this lead to next in raising our kids? Why, before you know it, it could lead to our little ones being told stories about, I don't know, maybe real young men being thrown into a blazing hot blast furnace. That would be something, wouldn't it? So, since you guys are all in middle school, and I'm guessing you're at least, 17, 18 years old? Now it's time for you to hear about the story of Jonah and the big fish. First, a little background. Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire, the same empire that in the future would conquer Israel and take them into captivity. They are enemies of Israel. Big enemies. Perhaps this is why Jonah is reluctant to speak to them. He knows about a prophet's life, or should I say, death. What chance did he have to survive bringing a message of God to his enemy? Whatever the reason for his disobedience, Jonah fled and got on a ship. That ship was bound for Tarshish. Where is Tarshish, you ask? Great question. So, through the wonders of modern technology and at great expense, let me show you on my screen the answer to that question. Here is an artist's rendition, a recreation of what Jonah might have actually looked like. Man, can you believe that technology? Here's Joppa where he boarded the ship. Here is the Mediterranean Sea. Oh man, it's so realistic. I thought I felt my fingers getting wet. Here is Tarshish. Who did that? Fire that person. This is Tarshish on the southern coast of Spain. In other words, Jonah literally tried to sail from one end of the Mediterranean Sea to another to get away from his calling. This would place him as far away from Nineveh as possible in the ancient world. Wow! But as we know, Jonah's plan does not work. A storm hits the ship, and the lives of everyone on it is in peril. It's determined that Jonah is the cause for the peril. So he's cast overboard and thrown into the sea. Again, through the wonders of technology and at great expense, it may have looked something like this. Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of the fish. Man, this is going to be a long video. I wish I'd thought this through more. I don't even have my cell phone with me to pass the time. Whew. It's a good thing through the wonders of technology, I also have editing. I'm hungry, though. I haven't eaten in 3 days. I wonder what I could get for lunch. Lunch? Nope. Can't eat yet. Let's finish the story. So, Jonah gets vomited up by the big fish onto the shoreline. And having learned his lesson, he then proceeds to Nineveh and delivers God's message. And much to his surprise, the people listen. Even the king. There's a call for regional repentance. What? That doesn't happen to prophets. What could possibly have persuaded the Ninevites to listen to Jonah? Here's a cool possibility, and I'm going to read from a book called Jonah in Nineveh by H. Clay Trumbull. He writes, one of the prominent gods in Assyria was one called the fish god. His name was Dagon. He is described as an upright figure having the head of a fish above the head of a man. The open mouth of the fish formed a mitre as the man's sacred headdress, and the feet of the man extended below the tail of the fish. Images of the fish god have been found guarding the entrance to the palace and the temple in the ruins of Nineveh. According to ancient historians, the very beginning of salvation here was under the direction of a personage, part man and part fish, who came up out of the sea. His voice, too, and language were articulate and human, this being used to converse with men in the daytime. And he gave them insight into letters and sciences and every kind of art. He taught them to construct houses, to found temples, to compile laws, and explained to them the principles of geometrical knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of the earth and showed them how to collect fruits. In short, he instructed them in everything which could tend to soften manners and humanize mankind. From that time, so universal were his instructions, nothing material has been added by way of improvement. Berosus, an ancient historian, also records that from time to time, ages apart, other beings of the same nature with this first great teacher came up out of the sea with fresh instructions for mankind. And that each one of these avatars or incarnations marked a new epoch, and the supernatural messenger bore a new name, so it would seem to be clear that the people of Nineveh were believers in a divinity, a God, who from time to time sent messages to them by a person who rose out of the sea as part fish and part man. This being so, is there not a perceptible reasonableness or logical consistency of movement in the narrated miracle of Jonah in the fish and of the wonderful success of the fish-ejected Jonah as a preacher in the Assyrian capital? What better heralding as a divinely sent messenger to Nineveh could Jonah have had than to be thrown up out of the mouth of a great fish in the presence of witnesses, say, on the coast of Phoenicia, where the fish god was a favorite object of worship? Such an incident would have inevitably aroused the mercurial nature of Oriental observers. so that a multitude would be ready to follow the seemingly new avatar of the fish god, proclaiming the story of his uprising from the sea. And as Jonah went on his mission to the city, where the fish god had its very center of worship, who would wonder that when it was heard in Nineveh that the new prophet among them had come from the very mouth of a fish in the sea to bring them a divinely sent warning, all the people from the greatest of them even to the least of them should be ready to heed the warning and to take steps to avert the impending doom proclaimed by him. In short, in the book of Jonah, if the book of Jonah is to be looked upon as verifiable history, veritable history, it is clear in the light of Assyrian records and Assyrian tradition that there was a sound reason for having Jonah swallowed by the fish in order to have him coming up out of the fish, and that the sudden and profound alarm of the people of an entire city at his warning was most natural as a result of the coincidence of this miracle with their religious beliefs and expectations. It would certainly seem to be true that if God desired to impress upon all of the people of Nineveh the authenticity of a message from himself, while leaving to themselves the responsibility of a personal choice as to obeying or disregarding the message, he could not have employed a fitter method than by sending that message to them in a way calculated to meet their most reverent and profound conceptions of a divinely authorized messenger. Pretty interesting, huh? And of course, when the Ninevites heard God's message and repented, Jonah was thrilled. Nope, he wasn't. Jonah chapter 4 verses 1 through 3 says, "But Jonah was greatly displeased and became angry. He prayed to the Lord, 'O Lord, is this not what I said when I was still at home? This is why I was so quick to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for it was better for me to die than live.'" Well, now we have it. The reason for Jonah's disobedience. He was afraid of success. He wanted the Ninevites to be judged and destroyed. And when that didn't happen, he got ticked. God's response? Jonah chapter 4, verse 4 and 11. "But the Lord replied, 'Have you any right to be angry? Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left. Should I not be concerned about this great city?'" Now, it may be confusing, the phrase 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left. What does it mean? There are several, mainly two common interpretations to answer that. One, the 120,000 are children. Children don't know yet right from left. I'm teaching McGizzy that very concept right now. If this is so, then the population of Nineveh and the surrounding area could have approached 500,000 people. It's a lot. A second common interpretation is that the 120,000 are the population of Nineveh itself, and not knowing their right hand from their left is a way to describe their spiritual ignorance. I would add a third possibility. The 120,000 who can't tell their right hand from their left are, of course, U of M fans. Duh! Regardless of which interpretation is correct, that's a lot of people, and God cares about each one of them. Finally, to close out the story of Jonah and the big fish, Jesus uses this very story to compare it to his death and resurrection. Matthew 12, verses 39 through 41 says, Jesus said, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And now one greater than Jonah is here." It's a good thing then that Jonah had success as a prophet, because Jesus is hoping for the same kind of repentant response from the entire world. What say you?